Welcome to the Modern Taoist with Kip Mann. Ancient wisdom, modern life, and the way. Join the free Modern Taoist community on Patreon at patreon.com/themoderntaoist or visit the website at taoananda.com. And now, the Modern Taoist.
Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Modern Taoist. My name is Kip Mann. And, first of all, since she brought up, as she does every week, the Patreon page, we're doing something new over there. It's kind of cool, kind of fun. We're going to start a new chat often where you can contribute pictures of whatever the topic is for that particular chat. And right now, the chat that is open is for you to share pictures of yourself or your family or whatever out in nature. And it's pretty fun to see some of the natural things that are going on in people's lives and how they're reconnecting and finding ways to reconnect with nature. That's over on patreon.com/themoderntaoist. It's always free, always will be. No reason to charge for a little bit of Taoist wisdom. What are we? Well, one of the things that I want to talk about today is, this is pretty obvious right here. If you're watching on video, and if you're not, if you're on audio only, I have a big bandage on my left finger, on my pointer finger on my left hand. Why is that? And I wasn't going to turn this into a lesson, but it's kind of ironic that it happened before the episode that we're going to talk about today. So what happened was on Saturday, I was teaching my 15-year-old how to sharpen a knife with a whetstone. And we got through it, and we sharpened the knife on the whetstone, blah, 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 blah. And we started talking about other ways that knives can be sharpened. And I said one of the other ways, a really fast way, is to do it with a stone on a bench grinder, which I happen to have a bench grinder because I use it in my putting restorations of putters. And I said, let's go out to the bench grinder, and I'll show you how it works. Now, I wasn't going to re-sharpen the knife, of course, but I had a wheel on there that was just a really soft denim wheel that I use for polishing. And I thought, well, I'll just show him how the knife would be sharpened if this was a sharpening stone. And I wasn't paying attention because I've done this 10,000 times in my life. And I did not give my full attention to it. And so I wasn't holding it properly with my right hand, and it spun out of my right hand as soon as it touched the wheel, and sliced through the finger of my left hand. And truthfully, had I not had any kind of reflexes at all, I probably would have lost that finger, to be honest with you. And there is a lesson there. It echoes chapter 64, as a matter of fact. Because the lesson is you give the same care to something in the middle that you do at the beginning. And this is where we screw up a lot in life, whether it's relationships or whether it's new tasks. We decide to give all the attention to something at the beginning because it's important. But once it becomes something we've done 1,000 times, we tend to be lax on how much of our present attention we give to it. And that's what happened to me. My attention had already moved on. And Lao Tzu warns us about this in chapter 64. We're often careful at the beginning because the beginning is important, and we give it our full attention. And when something becomes familiar or routine, we stop meeting it in the present. The wheel does not know this. The knife does not care. Something very Taoist about that, and I paid for it with my finger. But that's going to lead us into, ironically, today's episode. And today's episode is kind of a little bit about the opposite of what I just did. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we get further into this. Because today's episode, I want to stress to you guys, we've gone through, however many episodes now. We've been going for more than a year, and I think we're on episode 60-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood. And we've gone through all of these episodes, and each episode is a lesson. And people that are new to Taoism or have been with us from the beginning, I think I'm going to speak to both of you. Whether this is your first episode, this will be maybe a warning, not a warning, but a little pause for you. And if you've been listening every time, this is probably directed at a big, giant swath of you, because I get messages regularly from people who are frustrated, frankly, with their spiritual practice. Not because it's not working, but because they feel like, and I get this a lot, they're not doing it right. They're reading the books, they're sitting in their meditation, they're trying to notice their thoughts, they're not attaching to outcomes, they're trying to live in the present moment and find the Tao in the ordinary things in their daily ordinary life, and they feel like they're failing. Like the practice is just slightly still maybe out of reach, like there is a person they should be by now, and they're not that person yet. Or they listen to, I get this all the time, that people say to me, wow, you seem to easily put things into a Taoist perspective, and I just can't get there. Well, try to remember that I couldn't either. I had a teacher that had been a Taoist for 50, 60 years, and I couldn't get to where he was. And you're trying to get to where you think that I am. And that doesn't make you a failure. Here's something I want to say directly to every single person that is starting this particular practice. Actually, let me take that back. Any spiritual practice. You're making it harder than it needs to be. And that's not because the path is shallow, and it's not because the depth of it doesn't take time, because it does. But because the thing most people are doing when they call it spiritual practice, and you're not going to like this maybe, is you're performing a spiritual practice. When you turn every experience in an opportunity to demonstrate your practice, every difficult moment then will become a test of your practice. Every negative emotion becomes evidence that you're not developing properly. Every day that ends without a clear insight to how your day was, you're going to feel like you wasted it. And Taoism, which is supposed to make life easier and lighter, has been turned into another task, another job, another standard that you've set for yourself that you're falling short of. Another source of self-judgment. And this is where my caution comes in, because Taoism doesn't work that way. Taoism doesn't want you to self-judge. It wants you to do a few simple things. And that is, stop arguing with what is, start returning to the present when you stray, and start paying attention to the here and now. Most people begin this practice, or any spiritual practice, they begin it because something in their ordinary life isn't working. They have busyness or anxiety or sense that the days are, just going by without being fully inhabited. And they're probably right. The feeling that there has to be something more coherent underneath all of the noise. And that's what Taoism attempts to address. And for a while, when you first start, it does address that. The reading, the listening, the learning opens something, right? The sitting in meditation creates space. You start to figure it out. The attention to the present moment produces moments of genuine presence, and you start to feel the difference. And then something happens. Your practice becomes a project. And projects require standards and goals. And standards produce judgment. And the judgment, especially self-judgment on a spiritual level, is relentless in a way that your ordinary anxiety really never was, because now it's a spiritual judgment which carries the additional weight of who you fundamentally are, not just about what you are doing. You understand? So the person who used to feel bad about being disorganized now feels bad about being disorganized, but also about the way that being disorganized is causing their internal being to be. So we're piling on top of piling. A person who used to get angry at traffic now gets angry at traffic and then angry at themselves for getting angry at traffic. You see what I'm saying? In reality, a real Taoist is not going to do that. We're not going to pile layer upon layer. The practice adding friction is not what we're looking for. This is the trap. This is the trap that is built from genuine engagement with real life material. The books are good. The ideas are good. The podcasts are good. The observation that living in the present is better than living with the anxiety of the future, that is all good. None of that is wrong. What is wrong is what it's being turned into internally, which is a performance, evaluated against an imaginary standard held by an imaginary audience that is always watching, because those people live inside of you. And then we have the pressure of social media. There are entire communities built around the performance of spiritual development. Right? Meditation streaks are being tracked and shared online. I've meditated for 37 straight days. Well, goody gumdrops for you. Did you accomplish something, or did you perform the meditation? Right? Documenting something does not mean it was done correctly. Right? The language of awakening and growth and integration being developed constantly in a medium that rewards performance over the development itself. The performance of being a Taoist is not the same as being a Taoist. Taoism in this environment looks like a person who does not post every single thing. Look, there's nothing wrong with sharing. We share on the Patreon page. Nothing wrong with that. As long as you're not doing it as a statement. Right? We're not posting as a statement of our Taoism. We're posting as an inspiration. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's important to remember that Taoism does not produce content. The absence of content is fine. This is a trap that our ego falls in. By doing something that was supposed to help us, our ego becomes resourceful. Give your ego a spiritual path and it will find a way to be the star of it. Doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're a human being. So let's get back to what Taoism actually is asking of you. 3 things. First of all, let me just address something real quick. One of the I don't like to say argument because I don't believe people are arguing. I think a lot of people want to push back all the time when I will challenge them by saying something, and they will push back with, well, this is how things are going to be in the future. This is how it will happen if I follow this path. This is the number one way that I can tell that Taoism is not clicking, is when people start talking about what will happen or how they will feel in the future. This is an immediate flag to me to say, okay, either I'm not teaching you properly or you're not paying attention, or maybe Taoism is just not right for you at this time in your life, and that's okay. Because living in the present moment is the number one way to quote unquote practice Taoism. And this is not meant to be an achievement. It is not a state you arrive at and maintain. It is a direction that you keep returning to. The present moment is always available, but it's also always changing. You are in it right now. But now it is gone and you are in a different one. The question is only whether your attention is here or whether it is somewhere else, whether it is in the prediction of where you will be 3 months from now if this happens, if this happens, if this happens, if this happens. So the practice is to notice when you are not here and to return. That is the whole of what meditation teachers have been describing for centuries, using considerably more words, I might add. You will leave the present moment. That's not a failure. It's what human beings do. Approximately 10,000 times a day, you will leave the present moment because your mind is an instrument built for planning and problem solving and narrative construction, and it does not switch off simply because you've decided it needs to be present. You leave, you notice you have left, and you return. That is the practice. When you leave and begin making predictions and then you don't return to the future, that is when you are outside of the practice. You are not being, you're not doing, quote unquote, doing Taoism when you are predicting the future. When you are saying to yourself, this is going to happen, therefore I will feel this way. That is not Taoism, and that is not returning. You are staying in the future at that point. The practice is the returning. The practice is saying to myself or yourself, while you are noticing that you are living in the future, the practice is then saying, hang on a second, that's an imagined future. That is not anything that exists. Let's bring it back to here. The number 2 thing is you have to understand your nature and be true to it. Not the nature you wish you had. Not the nature that the tradition describes as ideal. Not trying to be my nature. I used to, when I first started with my teacher, I wanted to be like him so badly that I even considered, changing the way I dressed so that I could look more Taoy. But that's not my nature. My nature is that I wake up in the morning, I like to put on hoodies and t-shirts, and I like to wear golf clothes, and I like to play golf, and I like to hang out with my family. There are things that are in my nature that are not going to be in your nature. The things that bring you alive and the things that drain you are different than the things that bring me alive and drain me. The way you actually function rather than the way you think you should function is where I want you to live. Real preferences and real limits and the real shape of the person you are underneath the performance of who you think you should be. Being true to that nature is what Lao Tzu describes by Te or Day. Your inherent quality. Not the quality you are working to develop, but the one that is already there. So live in the present moment, notice when you are not there and return, and understand your nature and be true to it. Those are literally the only 3 things you need to do to be, quote unquote, a Taoist. The reason these 3 things feel insufficient to most people is because they're looking for a discipline. They're looking for something that requires training and development and visible progress over time. I had somebody ask me one time when I was a Qigong teacher, I had somebody ask me when they get their belts. I said, we don't do belts. This isn't Kung Fu. Because they wanted to know that they were making the steps properly. They said, how will I know when I'm doing this right? I said, don't worry, you'll know. And that's not good enough for some people. Right? Because they want things that can be measured and assessed and compared to to where you were 6 months ago. The three things: living in the present, notice when you're not there and returning, and understanding your nature and being true to it. Those three things don't work that way. You cannot be better at returning than you were. You just return or you don't. Right? And then you return or you don't. There is no advanced returning tutorial. There's no such thing as a beginner returning and an expert returning. You either return or you don't. You're either practicing or you're not. You either notice and come back, which is always available right now in this moment, or you continue to predict the future and claim that you're performing Taoism. Right? So these things are hard at the beginning to understand because we've been trained by Western culture to think in terms of progress and development. I want you to understand, in Taoism, there is no ladder. You either do it or you do not. There is no curriculum. There is no assessment. I am not judging. I'm not giving out grades. There is only the practice, which is always the same practice. And the reason Taoism is so beautiful is because it is always available. It does not require any prior development. There is not a prerequisite for becoming a Taoist. Let me tell you something that is true now, as true as it was 2,000 years ago, as true as it's been since the beginning of time. The master and the beginner are doing the same thing. The only difference is the master does it quicker because they have done it more often. And the doing of something more times has made things quieter. But they're doing the same thing. And you can start by doing it right now. Those three things. The three things. Right? Live in the present moment. Notice when you are not and return. And understand your nature and be true to it. Stop performing. And just be. That's it. Everything else is commentary. The commentary is interesting and sometimes it's useful. Not saying it's not, but that is not the practice. The practice is those three things. And if you go back and listen to every episode that I have done, at some point in that episode, those three things are going to come up. Because those three things are the things. Because they are available to you right now in the life that you are already living, without any additional equipment, without any additional training, without finding your tribe. And I'm not saying those things aren't helpful. And would it be helpful for you to hang out with a bunch of other Taoists? Yeah, probably. But does that mean that's how you get better? You don't get better. You either do it or you don't do it. There isn't a ladder. There isn't a progress chart. We're not writing things down on a board and you have to keep track of them. There's no test at the end. And the reason we're here is because most traditional or spiritual traditions, even the really good ones, have a bias towards complexity. From the genuine insight that depth takes time and the surface reading of teaching is rarely the whole teaching, that's true. Look, I'm not going to pretend it's not. When you read the Tao Te Ching the first time, you don't know what in the devil you're reading. It's not that easy to comprehend. And there will be Taoists and Chinese masters who will listen to me talk about my version or my take on certain chapters, and they'll be like, that's not what he was saying at all. And I go, well, I don't know. I think it probably was. Like, you see what I'm saying? But we're both doing it. We're both understanding it. We just are trying to get there from different places, and that's okay. You need to be able to distinguish the authentic teaching from the pretend teaching. That's okay. That's part of learning. But it doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong if you don't get it the first time. Lao Tzu wrote 81 chapters, and they are short. 81 short little poems, if you like. And then he stopped. He didn't write a commentary on the 81 chapters. He didn't establish a school with the entrance requirements. He wrote the thing, handed it over, and left. Because the thing contains what it needs to contain, and the person who is ready will receive it, and the person who is not will find it confusing, and that's fine. The confusion is often the resistance of the ego to a teaching. So when someone pushes back on Taoist teaching, almost every time I can see that what is happening is their ego doesn't like the lesson that they just learned. And they don't want to be different. So don't be. So the response to the confusion when your ego gets involved is to add more framework, arguing, more study, more practice, pushing back. That is all the performance of spiritual seriousness. It is the opposite of what Taoism is pointing at. Because Taoism is not complicated. It is direct. Do those three things. Do the three things, and you are a Taoist. The complicated path is the one that the ego builds up. Excuses that are made. There's nothing, my favorite one is, there's nothing wrong with me thinking like this. No, there's not. Think like that all you want. I don't, it doesn't matter. Because Taoism is not complicated. Taoism is much simpler than you think, but your ego keeps responding because surely it's not that simple. And then the practice gets elaborated by teachers who are after your dollar or after attention or seeking something other than just passing on the wisdom. So the practice gets elaborated until it looks like a task or something you should be doing correctly. And once you frame it that way, then it feels like work. And then when something feels like work, the person then begins performing the work rather than living the life. There's something Lao Tzu does in the 81 chapters. And it runs counter to how most spiritual teachers present his 81 chapters. He keeps making things smaller. Whereas many Taoist teachers want to make things bigger. Every time a concept threatens to become huge, he brings it back down to the immediate and the ordinary and one of the three things. In his description of the sage, it's not some guy sitting in a mountain cave dispensing wisdom. His sage is doing ordinary things, acting without claiming credit, leading without controlling. His sage looks from the outside like someone who is simply living their life well, not someone who is performing the living of a life well. The elaborate spiritual practices, the ones with the curriculum and the assessments and the lineage requirements, produces people who are performing the living of a spiritual life. Lao Tzu's model produces people who are simply just living in the moment, today, not worried about something that might happen 2 months from now or 2 years from now or 6 years from now. The difference between living your life and the performance of living is enormous. The person who is just living does not have a good story to tell about their development. They cannot point to the insights or the milestones or the stages they have moved through. They are just there, present, responsive, and requiring the situation to be nothing other than it is right now in this moment. And I'm not going to pretend that's an easy thing to be. It requires the disillusion of the project mind. The project mind is the mind that wants to take everything and turn it into a project that has to be accomplished. That is not what Taoism is asking. It does not require years of preparation. You can start today, right now, by doing those three things. It doesn't require you sitting 20 minutes in meditation. I've had many Zen teachers who I'll have conversations with. They will say to me, well, how long did you meditate today? I said, I don't know. Well, surely you must be in meditation. You have to sit in zazen for an hour and a half. No, I don't. I don't have to do that. That's performing. I'm not saying that they are wrong in their spiritual practice. Their spiritual practice is good for them, but that is not, you don't have to do that. There is not a clock. The Buddha did not have a stopwatch sitting next to him while he meditated under the tree. He just sat there. Right? So when people ask me, how long should I meditate? I don't care. I don't know. I meditate as long as you need to. I mean, can 10 minutes do it for some people? Sure. There are times when I squeeze in let me get in a quick 30. You know what I mean? Like, there are times where I just need some quiet. And so I'll squeeze in 5 minutes. But it comes naturally. It's not me performing. I don't make an announcement, I'm going to go meditate now and turn off all the lights and light the incense and, play the tinkle music. I just go and sit quietly and then I'm done. Because I'm not performing the meditation. I'm simply meditating. So this episode started with a conversation about something I hear all the time. And that is, how do I turn this into, how do I practice Taoism? The tendency to turn every experience into a lesson. And I did it at the beginning because I wanted to make my point about how we do that. So I showed you the story about the sharpening of the knife, and I turned it into a Taoist lesson. But that's because I'm teaching. I didn't afterwards immediately turn it into a lesson for myself or my son. I figured I learned a lesson, and he probably did too. How to cut half of your finger off. If you want to know how to do it, watch My Idiot Father. If you're super curious about how to cut your finger off, let me introduce you to Kit. That was the lesson. But I turned it into a Taoist lesson for you so that I could point out that is what we as human beings do sometimes. And that's the question I get a lot. How do I practice Taoism? So we have this tendency to turn every hard experience into a lesson, every loss into a teaching, every painful thing into an opportunity for growth. But let me tell you something. Pain is sometimes just pain. Loss, more often than not, is simply loss. And the Taoist practice in the middle of something genuinely hard is not to immediately extract meaning from it. It is to be in it, in the moment. Allow the difficulty to be difficult, because that's what it is. Don't add to the difficulty by transforming it into false wisdom, because the thing that is difficult is heavy enough. The person who loses someone they love and then spends the next 3 weeks trying to understand what they're supposed to learn from this is not practicing Taoism. They're doing the spiritual work as a way of not being inside their grief. Because the practice, the actual practice, is to let the grief be grief in the present moment and sit inside of it, because that is where you are. Grief does not need to become something else. Pain does not immediately need to turn into a lesson. Sometimes the pain is simply the pain. There's a Zen story about a master named Nansen, who lived in China around 800 CE, and he had a process of thinking that was deeply shaped by Taoist ideas. And one time a monk came to him and asked him, "What is the Tao?" And Nansen said, "Ordinary mind is the Tao." And the monk, who had been practicing, really hard monkish stuff, not monkey, monkey, but monkish. You get what I'm saying? He'd been practicing this really hard monk stuff, right? And he said, "So should I try to direct myself towards it?" And Nansen said, "If you direct yourself towards it, you move away from it." And the monk, he was like, "Okay, well, if I do not try, how will I know?" And Nansen said, "The Tao is not about knowing or not knowing, because knowing is a kind of a delusion, and not knowing is blank stupidity. So if you truly reach the Tao beyond a doubt, you will find it as vast and boundless as outer space. How can it be a matter, then, of yes or no?" Now, that story can be a little windy and hard to understand, I suppose. But that story is usually presented as something to sit with rather than explain. But for purposes of this episode, I want to explain to you because it contains something very direct. The monk is doing what most people do when they begin a spiritual practice. He's looking for the special thing, the practice, the technique. What do I have to do to get there? When all you have to do is be ordinary. Nansen keeps telling him the ordinary mind, the one you already have, on the ordinary day that you are already living. The Tao is underneath everything. It is available the moment you do the three things. That is the thing that distinguishes a practice from a performance. Because a performance needs every scene to be moving towards a resolution. The practice allows things to be where they are for as long as they need to be there. And in my way of believing, reading, teaching Taoism, and my experience of living it, it's patient in a way that other traditions are not. Because Taoism does not punish you for being a human being living inside of difficulty. It does not add spiritual judgment to the pile of pain that you're already carrying. You are allowed to be where you are, as long as you are purposefully living where you are. That is the teaching. That is it. Stop living in an imaginary future where you're trying to project things that may or may not happen and saying with all kinds of confidence how you will or will not feel when that arrives. Live today. Do the three things. And those things will bring you the peace that you're looking for. The other thing about pain and difficulty that the performance of spirituality tends to get wrong is the timing. The insight that eventually arrives from hard experience often doesn't arrive for months or years after the experience itself. And in that acute phase, there's nothing to extract. The acute phase is just getting through it, right? The meaning, if it comes way later, when your nervous system has had time to process what has happened, and the mind has had time to settle into the larger shape of your lived life. The person who tries to extract meaning in the middle of the acute phase is not being spiritually advanced. They're piling on. They're using the meaning extraction as a way of not being in the acute phase. Sit in the acute phase. When something is happening, let it happen. because that I've said to my oldest son the other day, and I've said this, I bet you I've said this sentence 10,000 times in my life. And I bet 5,000 times someone has tried to argue with me about it, but there is simply no argument for it. The reason is something is happening is because it is the only thing that could have happened. If it couldn't have, it wouldn't have. Live in what is happening, not what you think might happen, what you project will happen, or how you will feel when it happens, because you simply do not know. Do the three things, the three practices. They are available everywhere and require nothing. They don't require me. They don't require books. They don't require teachers. Do the three things. Right now, while you're listening to this or reading the captions, the present moment is right here for you. It's the actual texture of what is happening around you. The sound in the room, the temperature, the quality of the light, whether you're comfortable or not, whether your mind is here or somewhere else already. If it is somewhere else, that's fine. Notice that it's somewhere else. Come on back to here, because that's the practice. It happened just now. You did Taoism. You practiced. The question of your nature is a longer inquiry, but does not require a retreat or a teacher or a particular text. It requires only the willingness to notice what brings you alive and what drains you, and put your attention accordingly. That's it. That's it. The person who does these two things, who returns to the present when they notice they've left, and who makes more choices true to their actual nature, is practicing Taoism. Period. The end. They do not need to be able to discuss the history of the Tao Te Ching. They don't need to have a teacher with the proper lineage. They don't need to have a cushion that you sit on or some cool robes or whatever. You can get all those things if you want. I've got a cool cushion. I think it's in a closet. I've sat on it twice. It's okay. You can still get those things, but that's not the practice. The practice is the three things. Be honest about what is true. Be honest about what is now. Stop trying to predict the future. That is the whole path. And the path is there for you to return to at any point. If you stray off and become somebody else, and you're somebody else for 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, it doesn't matter, because the path is still there. All you have to do is practice the three things. I'll give you an image before I let you, before we move on today. I'm going to give you an image that I find useful when the practice feels like it should be more elaborate than it is. Okay? A thermostat does not perform temperature regulation. It does not study temperature regulation. It does not have a curriculum or a teacher or a lineage. It simply notices when the temperature has drifted from where it should be, and it turns on the proper machine to bring the temperature back. Over and over. Over and over. You don't even notice it throughout the day. It doesn't ask for credit. It doesn't need to document that it returned. It doesn't send an alert. Hey, by the way, I'm turning the air conditioner on. It just does its job. It just returns the temperature to where the temperature should be. Be the thermostat. Notice when your attention has gone somewhere else, and return your temperature, your attention to where you are. Over and over and over. Without alerting people, without saying, I'm going to go meditate now, without saying, hey, check out this new book I'm reading. You should read it too. Just return. The room is warm because the thermostat does what it does. You do not need to see it. It does not need to be recognized. It just needs to keep doing the thing. And that is the practice. Keep doing the thing. The three things. Just do those. I hope that helped. I got our listener question today. This one comes to you and to me from James in Adair, Oklahoma. And how do I know it's pronounced Adair instead of Adair? Because I used to live very close to there when I was a kid. James and Adair, I have made some very bad mistakes in my past, and I'm trying to be a better person, but my past haunts me literally and figuratively. How can Taoism and how can you help me? Well, James, I want to respond to this in the spirit of this episode about making things simpler rather than more complicated. The fact that your past haunts you is not evidence that you have failed to grow. It is evidence that you take what happened to you seriously. People who do not take their mistakes seriously are not haunted by them. In fact, they defend them. The haunting is your conscience at work, which means your conscience is intact. And you need conscience to become the better part of the better person. The Taoist practice in your situation is the three things. Be in the present moment. Your past is not here in the present moment. It is in the past. It is fixed and it cannot be changed. The only variable available to you is what you do right now, today, in the time that is actually yours. Because the past is no longer yours. You did that. It's done. The future is not yours because it does not exist. Stop inventing stories about what may or may not happen. The haunting is the mind returning to something it cannot change. You will not work your way to a different past. You will not spiritualize your way to a different past. The past is fixed. It has happened. It is not changing. But you can work towards a different present. And your different present over time becomes a different past. Notice when your mind goes to your past and bring it back. Not to pretend it didn't happen, but to recognize that you are not currently in the past and you never will be. You are in the present. Be true to your nature. Because I can tell that you're trying to be a better person. The person who is trying to be better is part of the nature now. That is real. That is who you are. Act on that, not on who you were. Your mistakes were real. The harm, if there was harm, was real. Your growth does not undo that. But what it does is add to what exists now, which eventually will become your past. The person who you were is not erased. The person you are becoming is being added. The Tao moves forward. It does not require you to have been different before. It allows you to be different right now. Your Taoist assignment for this week is just one thing. At some point during the day when you notice your mind has gone to the future, gone somewhere else, don't judge yourself. Just notice it and come back. Don't argue with it. Don't make it a practice session or a spiritual exercise. Just notice and return. Whenever it happens naturally. That is the practice. Not a metaphor for the practice, not a performance of the practice. The actual practice. Live in the present. Do it once a week with your full attention and watch what it produces. One more thing I want to say before we close because it belongs in this episode. The show is not asking you to be more Taoist. I am not asking you to be more Taoist. It is not a performance that requires another performance. If you listen to this episode and immediately try to apply the three things in a way that feels like another project, then something has gone wrong because the three things are not a project. They are a description of what happens when you stop performing. So please remember, I don't need you to do more. I need you to do less. Less tends to produce more. Right? Taoism is not asking you to be wise about every hard thing. It's not asking you to turn every loss into a lesson. or every difficult moment into a growth opportunity. It's asking you to be where you are right now. Notice when you're not, and to know to be honest about who you are, and let that shape your choices rather than who you think you should be. The 3 things on a Tuesday in the life you already have. That's it. Thanks for being with us. Please join us over on Patreon at patreon.com, where we have some nice interactions all the time. A lot of inspiration over there, and a lot of people saying hi, and I love that. Chime in from where you are in the world that you're listening to the podcast. That's awesome. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, heart, thumbs up us, whatever you need to do to indicate that you would like to support the show. We appreciate that. If you'd like some private guidance, that's available on the website at daoananda.com or .org, DAOANANDA.com. And until next time, I'll see you again on The Modern Taoist.
Thanks for listening to The Modern Taoist with Kit Mann. Join the free Patreon community at patreon.com/The Modern Taoist and subscribe to the podcast for new episodes every Tuesday and weekend Taoism check-ins every Friday. Visit the website at daoananda.com and don't forget to like and follow us on whatever platform you find us.